1993, the British cycling team was one of the weakest in Europe. For more than 100 years, they had never won the Tour de France. But in 2003, when Dave Brailsford took over as the team's performance director, he brought a peculiar philosophy, the aggregation of marginal gains. He argued that if you improved every single aspect of cycling by just 1%, the comfort of the bike seat, the friction of the tires, the pillows riders slept on, even the correct way to wash hands, all those tiny gains would add up to something remarkable. People laughed. 1% seemed like nothing. But within 5 years, at the 2008 Olympics, the British cycling team won 60% of the gold medals available. In 2012, they broke their own Olympic record. And between 2012 and 2017, British cyclists won the Tour de France 5 times. 100 years of failure had turned into total dominance in just a few years. And the secret was tiny: daily improvement. That's the real power of the 1% rule. If you get 1% better every day for a year, you end up roughly 37 times better by the end. But if you get 1% worse every day, you decline nearly to zero. The difference seems small on any given day, but over time, it compounds. Just like interest in a bank account. The problem is, our brains aren't wired to understand this kind of slow, exponential change rather than a linear one. We want instant results. We go to the gym once, see no visible change, and quit in frustration. We save money for a month, don't feel rich, and stop investing. But the truth is, the results of habits often pass through a latency period, like an ice cube, sitting in a room that slowly warms from -4 degrees to -1 degree with no visible change at all, until it hits 0 and suddenly starts melting. Every single degree took equal effort. We just don't see the payoff until the very end. So the real question in building habits isn't what you want to achieve, it's who you wish to become. Every small action is a vote you cast for the type of person you want to be. And it's the sum of those votes that eventually turns you into an entirely different person. Every 4 years, thousands of athletes walk into the Olympic Stadium with the exact same goal: win gold. The swimmer in lane 4 wants it. So does the swimmer in lane 5. So does everyone who trained for this moment and will go home without a medal. If everyone shares the same goal, the goal itself can't be what separates the champion from the rest. Something else decides who wins. James Clear puts it simply: you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. A goal is the result you want. A system is the daily process that produces that result. And when you study people who reach the top of any field, the goal was rarely the thing that got them there. It was what they did on the ordinary, unfilmed, unremarkable Tuesday afternoons for years before anyone was watching. Consider a team of researchers who set a goal to clean up their workspace once. It felt good for a week. Then it slipped back to clutter because nothing about their system had changed. Only their intention. The same happens with people every January. They set a goal to lose weight, to save money, to write a book. The goal is clear. The motivation is high. And by February, most have quietly stopped, not because they wanted it less, but because they never built a system that made the behavior automatic. There's a deeper problem with goals, too. Achieving one creates only a momentary shift. A person who sets a goal to organize their desk, once it's tidy, feels done. And the old habits creep back in, because nothing about the underlying system that created the mess was addressed. Goals can even work against you. Athletes who reach a career-defining goal often struggle afterward, entering what's known as a post-goal slump, because their sense of purpose was tied to a finish line rather than an ongoing identity. This is why the most reliable people in any field talk less about outcomes and more about process. A writer doesn't succeed by fixating on finishing one book. They succeed because they built a system of writing every day. An investor doesn't succeed by chasing one great return. They succeed because they built a system of disciplined, repeatable decisions. The goal can tell you what you want. Only the system can get you there. There's a woman who quit smoking, and when a stranger offered her a cigarette, she didn't say, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." She said something entirely different. "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." 5 words. But those 5 words reveal one of the most powerful shifts in the entire science of habit change. The difference between changing what you do and changing who you believe you are. Most people build habits backward. They start with what they want to achieve. Lose 10 pounds, run a marathon, write a book, and work toward it, hoping the results will eventually convince them they've changed. But James Clear argues the truth runs the opposite direction. Real lasting change doesn't start with outcomes. It starts with identity. The woman who said, "I'm not a smoker," wasn't resisting a craving through willpower. She had already redefined who she was, and the behavior simply followed. There are 3 layers to every change. On the outside are outcomes, what you get. In the middle are processes, what you do. But at the very core are beliefs, who you think you are. Most people try to change from the outside in, chasing outcomes without ever touching identity. But the people who change and stay changed do it from the inside out. Every action you take is more than a task completed. It's evidence. Each time you write one page, you're not just writing. You're casting a vote for, "I am a writer." Each time you go for a run, you're voting for, "I am the kind of person who takes care of their body." No single vote transforms you, but an identity is built the same way a nation elects a leader. Not by one voice, but by an accumulation of votes cast over time until the majority belief becomes undeniable. This is also why identity can trap you as easily as it frees you. Someone who has failed at diets for years starts to believe, "I'm just not disciplined," and that belief becomes self-fulfilling, sabotaging every future attempt before it begins. Identity cuts both ways. It's the deepest reason habits stick, and the deepest reason they resist change. So the real work of building a habit was never about the habit at all. It was about deciding, quietly and repeatedly, who you intend to become, and then letting the evidence pile up until you believe it. In a lab at MIT, researchers once wired a rat's brain to record its activity as it ran through a maze, searching for a piece of chocolate hidden at the end. The first time, the rat's brain worked furiously, sniffing, backtracking, exploring every wrong turn. But after running the same maze dozens of times, something extraordinary happened. Right before the rat reached the chocolate, its brain activity would spike and then go almost silent through the middle of the run. The behavior had become automatic. The rat wasn't thinking anymore. It was running on a loop. That loop is the same one wired into every human habit, and it has 4 distinct parts. First comes the cue, a trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode. It could be the smell of coffee, a notification buzzing on your phone, or simply the time on the clock hitting 5 in the afternoon. The cue itself is neutral. It only matters because of what it predicts. Second comes the craving. This is the motivational force behind every habit, and it's crucial to understand. You don't crave the habit itself. You crave the change in state it promises. A smoker doesn't crave a cigarette. They crave the relief it delivers. Nobody wants to brush their teeth. They want the feeling of a clean mouth. Without craving, there is no reason to act. Third comes the response, the actual habit you perform, the thought or action you take. Whether this response occurs depends on how motivated you are and how much friction stands between you and the behavior. A locked door doesn't stop a craving. It just makes the response harder to complete. Finally comes the reward. This is the end goal of every habit for 2 reasons. Rewards satisfy the craving that triggered the behavior, and rewards teach your brain which actions are worth remembering and repeating in the future. Your brain is, in essence, a feedback machine, constantly asking, did that action deliver something valuable enough to do again? Strip these 4 steps down, and a pattern appears. The cue triggers a craving. The craving motivates a response. The response delivers a reward, and the reward satisfies the craving and becomes associated with the cue. This is the habit loop, the neurological loop underlying every behavior humans repeat, good or bad. And here lies the real power of understanding this loop. Once you can name the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward driving any behavior, you no longer have to fight your habits blindly in the dark. You can see the machine from the outside, and machines, once understood, can be redesigned. In the 1930s, a group of researchers studying dogs made a discovery that would later explain nearly every automatic behavior in human life. A dog didn't need to see food to start salivating. It only needed to hear a bell that had once predicted food. The bell itself held no nutrition, but repetition had turned it into a signal so powerful, the body reacted before the mind even caught up. This is the essence of Law 1. Before you can control a habit, you first have to see the cue that triggers it. And most of us never do, because life's cues have become invisible through repetition. Every habit begins with a cue you barely notice. The phone buzzes, and your hand moves before you decide to move it. You walk into the kitchen, and your feet carry you to the cabinet where the snacks live, without a single conscious thought. The goal of this first law is simple but radical. Make the cues for good habits obvious, and make the cues for bad habits invisible. One of the most effective tools for this is something called habit stacking. Instead of trying to attach a new habit to a specific time, which the brain easily forgets, you attach it to a habit you already do without fail. After I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 1 minute. After I take off my work shoes, I will change into my workout clothes. The existing habit becomes the cue. You're not creating motivation from nothing. You're borrowing the momentum of a behavior your brain has already automated. But cues don't only live in routines, they live in rooms. Researchers studying hospital patients trying to quit smoking found something striking. Patients who stayed in wards that made smoking difficult to see or access quit at dramatically higher rates than patients who received counseling alone. The environment, not willpower, was doing the work. This is why visible fruit on a counter gets eaten more than fruit hidden in a drawer, and why a guitar left out in the open gets played more than one zipped away in its case. Every environment is a silent invitation to a specific set of behaviors, whether or not you notice it's inviting you. And there's one more tool that closes the gap between intention and action: the implementation intention. Most people say, "I'll exercise more," and leave it vague, and vague intentions rarely survive contact with a busy day. But research shows that people who instead state a specific plan, "I will behavior," at time and location, are far more likely to follow through, because they've already decided, in advance, exactly when and where the cue will appear. Make it obvious isn't about willpower at all. It's about engineering the moment before the habit, so that by the time you'd normally have to decide, the decision has already been made for you. A graduate student named Ronan Byrne had a problem familiar to millions. He loved watching Netflix, and he hated exercising. So instead of fighting the craving, he decided to hijack it. He rigged his stationary bike to his laptop so that Netflix would only keep playing as long as he kept pedaling. Stop pedaling, and the screen went dark. Within weeks, he was cycling for hours. Off it. Not because he'd developed sudden discipline, but because he'd made the habit he needed irresistibly tied to the habit he already craved. This is the second law. Make it attractive. The brain doesn't crave the habit itself. It craves the dopamine spike that comes right before the reward. And here is the strange, useful trick hidden in that fact. You can borrow the pull of something you already want and attach it to something you don't yet want until they become inseparable. This is called temptation bundling, pairing an action you need to do with an action you want to do, so the two fuse into a single, more attractive habit. But attraction isn't only manufactured inside one person's routine. It's inherited from the people around them. Researchers studying obesity found something remarkable. If a close friend became obese, a person's own risk of obesity rose by 57%, even without any change in that person's own behavior. We don't choose habits in isolation. We absorb them from three groups in particular: the close, the many, and the powerful. We imitate the people close to us because their approval matters. We imitate the majority because fitting in with the tribe once meant survival. And we imitate those with status because status has always signaled what behaviors are worth copying. This is why joining a culture where the behavior you want is already the norm can matter more than any individual willpower ever could. A person trying to run regularly who joins a group of runners doesn't have to convince themselves to lace up. The identity is already being modeled all around them, and belonging becomes the reward. The habit stops feeling like self-denial and starts feeling like membership. This is the quiet secret behind Law 2. Humans don't repeat habits because they are good for them. They repeat habits that feel good in the moment. And belonging, dopamine, anticipation, and social approval are what turn a difficult behavior into one the brain actually wants to chase. In a hospital cafeteria, researchers ran a quiet experiment that changed how an entire institution ate. They didn't ban unhealthy food. They didn't lecture anyone about nutrition. They simply moved the water bottles to eye level and placed them within easier reach across the cafeteria while pushing the soda slightly further away. Within weeks, soda sales dropped and bottled water sales soared, not because anyone's willpower had improved, but because one option had become a fraction of a second easier to grab than the other. That fraction of a second was enough to reshape thousands of daily decisions. This is Law 3. Make it easy. Every habit, good or bad, is governed by a hidden force called friction. The number of steps between you and an action determines, more than motivation ever will, whether that action actually happens. Add friction to a bad habit and it weakens. Remove friction from a good habit and it strengthens, often without you needing any extra willpower at all. Consider a man who wanted to watch less television. He didn't try to resist the urge each night. Instead, he unplugged the TV after every use and removed the batteries from the remote, so that turning it on required walking to a drawer, finding batteries, and resetting the plug. The craving hadn't changed, but the 20 extra seconds of friction was enough to make him choose a book instead, night after night, until the new choice became the default. Then there's the rule that has quietly rewired more habits than almost any other piece of advice in the book. The 2-minute rule. Any new habit when you're starting out should take less than 2 minutes to do. Not read more, read 1 page. Not exercise for an hour. Put on your workout clothes. The goal in the beginning was never mastery. The goal was to master the art of showing up, because a habit must be established before it can be improved. And no one has ever failed to keep a habit that only asked 2 minutes of them. But the world will not always make things easy for you, which is why some people build in a final safeguard. A commitment device, a choice made in the present that locks in better behavior in the future, before temptation has a chance to argue its case. A man who wanted to save money automatically had his paycheck split before it reached his hands, so saving wasn't a decision he made every month, but a decision he made only once. Ease was never about laziness. It was about understanding that the most consistent person doesn't have the most willpower. They simply removed, one by one, every reason not to begin. In the 1990s, a bank in South Africa faced a strange problem. Customers understood exactly why they should save money, yet almost none of them did. So researchers tried something unusual. Instead of appealing to logic, they sent some customers a simple reminder with a small twist, a lottery-style incentive attached to their savings account, offering an immediate, tiny chance of reward for a behavior that would otherwise pay off only decades later. Deposits rose sharply. The math of saving hadn't changed. What changed was that the reward no longer lived only in the distant future. This is the problem at the heart of Law 4. Make it satisfying. The brain is wired to prioritize immediate rewards over delayed ones, a bias shaped by millions of years of evolution long before anyone worried about retirement accounts or long-term health. A habit that pays off in a decade will always struggle against a habit that pays off in a second. If a behavior doesn't feel rewarding right now, the brain has little reason to repeat it, no matter how good it is for you in the long run. So the task becomes clear. Attach a small, immediate feeling of success to the habit you're trying to build. One family trying to save money kept a jar of marbles. Every time they skipped an unnecessary purchase, a marble moved from one side to the other, a small, visible signal that something had worked. It changed nothing about their bank balance in that instant, and yet the feeling of progress was enough to keep them going through the months, where the real financial results were still invisible. This is also why tracking a habit works so well. A simple mark on a calendar for every day a habit is completed does two things at once. It provides visual proof of progress, satisfying enough to matter, and it creates a streak most people become reluctant to break. The tracking itself becomes a kind of quiet scoreboard, turning invisible discipline into something the eyes can measure. But tracking alone can be gamed by no one but yourself, which is why the most durable systems add a second person into the loop. An accountability partner, a habit contract, a friend who checks in, a coach who notices when you disappear. These introduce an immediate social cost to missing a day, long before the long-term cost ever arrives. Nobody wants to explain to another person why they quietly gave up. Satisfaction was never a luxury added onto a habit. It was the missing signal that told the brain, this one is worth repeating. There's a simple test that reveals whether any habit deserves to stay in your life. Strip away everything else and ask what problem it's actually solving. A man who bites his nails every time he sits at his desk isn't struggling with willpower. He's using the habit to relieve boredom or anxiety in that exact moment. Every bad habit, no matter how self-destructive it looks from the outside, is solving some real problem on the inside. And that's precisely why the same 4 laws that build a habit can be run in reverse to dismantle one. To break a habit, you invert Law 1. Instead of making the cue obvious, you make it invisible. A man trying to spend less time on his phone didn't rely on discipline. He left it in another room while working and simply never had the chance to be tempted. Because a craving that's never triggered never has to be resisted. Environment did, in seconds, what motivation had failed to do for years. Researchers studying soldiers who developed heroin addictions in Vietnam found something remarkable. The vast majority stopped entirely once they returned home, not through willpower, but because every cue that had triggered the addiction stayed behind in a different environment. Next comes Law 2, inverted, make it unattractive. This means reprogramming the belief driving the craving in the first place. A person trying to quit smoking who kept repeating, Orca, I get to breathe clean air, I get to keep my sense of taste, was quietly rewiring what the habit meant to their brain, turning deprivation into liberation. Then Law 3, inverted. Make it difficult. Increase the friction between yourself and the unwanted behavior until the easiest path is no longer the harmful one. A man who wanted to stop overspending online deleted his saved payment information so that every purchase now required minutes of deliberate effort instead of one careless click. And in those minutes, most cravings simply lost their grip. And finally, Law 4, inverted. Make it unsatisfying. The fastest way to stop a behavior is to attach an immediate cost to it. Some people commit real money to a friend, forfeited automatically. The moment they skip a habit, they're trying to build or repeat one. They're trying to break because a private failure rarely stings enough, but a public immediate cost almost always does. None of these 4 reversals require becoming a different, stronger-willed person. They simply require redesigning the moment of decision so that walking away from the bad habit becomes the path of least resistance, exactly the way indulging in it once was. There's a reason lottery winners often go broke, while ordinary savers quietly build fortunes over decades. Money that comes too easily creates no story worth sustaining, and a task that comes too hard breaks the will to continue at all. Somewhere between those two extremes lies a narrow, invisible zone where humans do their best, most consistent work. And understanding it explains why some habits thrive for years while others collapse within weeks. Researchers studying tennis players once discovered something unexpected. The most engaged, most motivated matches weren't the ones players won easily, nor the ones they lost badly. They were the matches decided by the smallest margins, games, close enough to feel winnable, difficult enough to feel earned. This is what psychologists call the Goldilocks rule. Humans experience peak motivation when working on tasks that sit right on the edge of their current abilities. Not too easy, not too hard, just manageable enough to believe success is possible, and just difficult enough to require real effort to get there. This edge is also where a rare mental state appears, something researchers call flow, the sensation of being so completely absorbed in a task that time itself seems to disappear. Studies on flow found that it consistently emerges when a challenge is calibrated to roughly 4% beyond a person's current skill level. Push much further than that, and anxiety takes over. Fall much short of it, and boredom sets in. The margin for peak engagement, it turns out, is remarkably thin. This is why a habit that once felt exciting can slowly become invisible. A runner who begins at the edge of their ability improves within weeks, and the same route that once felt challenging starts to feel routine. The habit hasn't failed. It has simply drifted out of the narrow zone that made it engaging in the first place, and without new difficulty, motivation quietly starves. The deeper lesson is that mastering a habit was never the finish line. It was the beginning of the next edge. The moment something becomes easy is the exact moment it must be made. Slightly harder again, not because the old version failed, but because growth only survives at the boundary between boredom and anxiety, forever slightly out of reach, forever worth chasing. There's a story about an ice cube sitting in a room at -4 degrees. Someone raises the temperature by 1 degree, and nothing happens. Another degree, still nothing. -2, -1, still nothing at all. Not one visible sign of change. And then the temperature crosses 0, and in an instant, the cube begins to melt. Every single degree took identical effort, but only the last one produced a result anyone could see. This is the exact shape of nearly every meaningful achievement in human life, and almost no one recognizes it while they're living through it. James Clear calls this the plateau of latent potential, the gap between the effort you're putting in and the results you can actually observe. In our minds, we imagine progress as a straight line. Work hard, see steady results day after day. But real progress rarely looks like that. It looks like nothing for a long, uncomfortable stretch, while the work quietly accumulates beneath the surface, unseen and unmeasured, until it suddenly breaks through all at once. This explains one of the strangest patterns in human behavior. People abandon habits at the exact moment those habits were about to work. A man goes to the gym for a month and sees nothing in the mirror, so he quits, 2 weeks before the changes would have become visible. A writer fills notebook after notebook with work no one will ever read, and stops just short of the manuscript that would have finally clicked into place. From the outside, it looks like failure. In truth, it was simply the ice cube at -1 degree. The reason we quit here isn't weakness. It's a mismatch between how we expect change to feel and how change actually behaves. Effort deposited into a system doesn't vanish just because it isn't visible yet. It compounds, silently, the same way a valley slowly floods long before the water ever reaches the rim. The final straw that breaks a habit's resistance was never doing the real work alone. Every straw before it mattered exactly as much. This is why the people who reach mastery in any field share one trait more than any other. They kept going through the part where nothing seemed to be happening, not because they could see progress, but because they understood that the absence of visible progress was never proof of no progress at all. It was simply the shape every breakthrough takes right before it arrives. Picture 2 people standing at the same starting line, each choosing to get 1% better every single day. Neither one looks any different after a week. Neither looks different after a month. From the outside, nothing has happened at all, but run that same 1% forward for a year, and the math becomes almost impossible to believe. Not double, not triple, but roughly 37 times better than where they began. This is the quiet arithmetic that was sitting underneath everything this series has explored. From a British cycling team's forgotten pillows to an ice cube, sitting patiently at -1 degree. Across these episodes, one truth kept resurfacing in different disguises. It was never really about the habit itself. It was about the system carrying it, the identity casting a vote for it, and the four quiet laws deciding whether it would survive contact with an ordinary Tuesday. Make it obvious, so the cue doesn't hide from you. Make it attractive, so the craving pulls you forward instead of away. Make it easy, so friction never gets the final say. Make it satisfying, so the reward arrives before the doubt does. 4 laws, running underneath every behavior a person has ever repeated, whether they meant to or not. And running beneath all 4 was something even more. Foundational, every action taken, however small, was a ballot cast for the kind of person someone intended to become. Not a single grand transformation, but thousands of ordinary moments. An alarm not snoozed, a page written, a savings transfer made automatically before temptation had a chance to speak. None of them felt significant alone. Together, they became an identity no one could argue with, because it had been proven. Quietly, one vote at a time. The hardest part was never understanding these ideas. It was staying at -1 degree, doing the work while the mirror, the bank balance, and the calendar all insisted nothing was happening. This is where most people leave. Exactly 1 degree before the breakthrough they couldn't yet see. The ones who stayed weren't smarter or more disciplined. They simply trusted that effort deposited quietly does not vanish. It compounds, the same way it always had, whether anyone was watching or not. So the real work now begins somewhere, far quieter than any of these episodes, in the next ordinary choice. Not a resolution, not a big declaration, but one small, boring 2-minute action, repeated tomorrow, and then the day after that. Somewhere ahead, invisible today, is a version of that same person, 37 times further along than where they started, built entirely, the way it always is, one atomic habit at a time.